President Trump dismissing the massive security breach created by his top national security officials because the operation was ultimately successful.
There was no harm done because the attack was unbelievably successful that night.
Fareed Zakaria, host of Fareed Zakaria, GPS, is here now. So, Fareed, what does this whole incident reveal about this administration?
Well, it's a great question. Let me just begin by pointing out, Erin, that we don't know that the attack was successful. Saudi Arabia inflicted these kind of bombing attacks on the Houthis for years and were ultimately not successful in actually defanging them. So, but put that aside for a minute. Look, what the broader issue this reveals is an administration that has kind of contempt for the processes and institutions of the liberal democratic state that the United States has built. You know, it's go into a department if you're Doge, don't bother to learn anything about the process or the procedures, fire everybody. You're at the NIH, just stop all the grants. You know, there have been these elaborate procedures by which scientists get funded. No, stop that all. Go into the courts, and the courts ask you for documentation, for reasons why you're deporting people. And they just don't provide them. They're effectively defying court orders. And the courts and the judges are saying, look, you're not following the normal procedures we do. So this is really, to my mind, the most vivid example of this complete disrespect for the institutions, the norms, the procedures by which the American state, the American democracy has been functioning, because a lot of these people have contempt for all of this. This is, at the end of the day, to them, the deep state. Well, what this reveals is sometimes it's the deep state has deep security procedures for a reason, to protect lives.
You know, I'm also curious, the response around the world, Fareed, has been, and from European allies, rather muted. Obviously, you saw Europeans in this thing called, nobody wants to help them, God forbid, right? They were called pathetic. And that there's more of where that came from, Vance's Munich speech, right? We all know that. And yet, the context is, I don't know if you saw this today, but the EU put a thing out today citing rising global tensions, saying that citizens should stockpile 72 hours worth of food and other essentials in event of an emergency, whether that be a war or an attack, right? This is Europe, and they're being told to do that. I mean, it's sort of, you read that and you pause. In the context of this Signal chat, what are the top echelons of the European government, European national security? What do they really think about this?
So there are two things going on. One, there is a bit of surprise and bewilderment about the callousness towards these security procedures, because the U.S. has always been the gold standard on all this kind of thing. The U.S. has always been the place where if the Secretary of State, let alone the President, goes somewhere, they have to construct a skiff, a special compartmentalized security booth in which emails, phone conversations take place so that nothing is revealed, because the United States is the only global superpower with military power around the world. So there's always been the sense that the U.S. Does this stuff at the ultimate standard of security. But the larger issue again here is what it revealed, particularly in Vice President Vance's comments, which, really he represents the kind of ideology, if you will, of MAGA, which is that the United States for 80 years has seen itself as the protector of the free world, as the guarantor of the security of the free world. It is at the center of it, right? But what was revealed is that J.D. Vance thinks of it more like we're running a protection racket. And what we need to figure out is if there are more European ships that are being helped than American ships, then why don't we do a shakedown of the Europeans? No president of either party, no vice president for 80 years would have ever said that.
The context of this chat obviously was an attack on Houthis, right, who have been sending missiles into Israel, right? It's all tied with the situation in Gaza. There's a significant development there on the ground, which is large crowds of Palestinians in Gaza have been protesting against the war there. And actually, Hamas is the reporting here, Fareed. And this is the second day of that. Now, Hamas says, this does not reflect the Palestinian overall view. They're implying that this is really an Israeli thing, that Israelis are getting this to happen. How do you see it?
I think it's a very important development. I think if it's happening, the United States and everybody involved should encourage it. Look, Hamas has been terrible for Palestinians. Hamas has been one of the most important obstacles to a Palestinian state, to a two-state solution, for Israel to have any degree of trust and faith in the idea that they could live side by side with Palestinians. Anything that weakens Hamas helps the Palestinian people. It's very important to make a distinction between the Palestinian people and Hamas, who have been misleading them for the last few decades.
Fareed, thank you. Let's go now to Democratic Senator Adam Schiff, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, also former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, as our viewers well know. So, Senator, all right, here we are. In this, it is an extraordinary moment. And you just heard President Trump saying this is all a witch hunt, and he does appear to be referring to signals sometimes as like some sort of a conference call. It's a bit unclear. What do you say to him?
Well, President Truman was the buck stops here. Donald Trump is the buck stops anywhere but anywhere near me. That effort at deflection, I really don't know. I wasn't involved. He's now claiming Hegseth wasn't involved. It is really pathetic, but what it tells all of us, what it tells the national security professionals, what it tells people in the Pentagon, what it tells the American people is there will be no accountability in his administration. He isn't going to hold people responsible. He doesn't want to fire people. He doesn't even want to talk about it. He wants to put this off as another witch hunt, another hoax, as kind of go-to deflection. But don't look at me. Whatever you do, America, I'm not responsible. That's just going to breed further mistakes. We can't have any confidence this is going to be rectified if all of those people on that chat are basically saying, there's nothing to see here. Okay, yeah, it should have been classified. They can't even admit that. Jim Himes properly read the very guidance that the intelligence community gives on a discussion exactly like this one. And the DOD guidance, although Tulsi Gabbard tried to deflect, is almost exactly the same. This was heavily classified, or it should have been, and there's no escaping that.
Well, and of course, there's no escaping that phones that were on this are compromised phones, that this didn't go through any sort of protocol. I'm also curious, Senator, what you make of, there are a lot of people in this chat who should not have been there, okay? Lots of them. I mean, you don't have a conversation with staffers and people at the top with operational security attack plans. It's not something the U.S. government does, at least until now when we see this. But the vice president would not be in this chat. But the head of the CIA would not see a strike plan package, right? This would not happen. But in all the people that were in there, there's one thing that I noticed is not there. The head of the Joint Chiefs, right? So they're putting all this information out, but not to the operational military guy?
It is very bizarre how they chose the people on this chat. It was almost as if Walz wanted to sort of brag to this crowd of people what was going on with this operation. But you're absolutely right. There were a whole lot of people with no need to know. It is, yet another element of why this was so poorly handled, and that is they shouldn't have been talking about this on Signal. It should have been highly classified. They should have had nowhere near the participants in this conversation, even in a classified space. And then to essentially deny or try to denigrate the seriousness of this means that they're not going to address it. It is the sign of both the inexperience and incompetence of a lot of these people. Hegseth way out of his depth. He passed by a single vote. That vote was J.D. Vance in the Senate coming in to break the tie. That has not aged well. But more than that, I look at someone like Ratcliffe, who does have at least some modicum of experience, and nowhere in the chat does he say, hey, people, we shouldn't be talking about this on a commercial app. Tulsi Gabbard had no experience. She has no business being there either. But for Ratcliffe, it was even more inexcusable because he knows better than this. But none of them are willing to really contradict the misuse of power. They really seem like they're drunk with power, and there's a kind of arrogance about what we witness in this chat. Arrogance towards our allies, arrogance towards national security protocols that should be followed, just incompetence and arrogance, which is a dangerous mix for the country.
A dangerous mix in any setting, and certainly at the top of the U.S. government. Thank you very much, Senator.